A federal judge yesterday ordered the Justice Department to unredact additional pages of the Epstein files, concluding that, quote, the Attorney General has violated the Epstein Act by redacting the names of senders and recipients in at least 8 email exchanges with Mr. Epstein regarding a torture video and sexual activity with young women, including minors. Joining our conversation right now is former federal prosecutor Brendan Ballou, who represents Katie Phang. Katie Phang is the independent journalist who filed the suit, and good for her for doing so. So, Brendan, the Justice Department now has until July 2nd to either turn over these documents or explain why the redactions should not be unredacted. Are you expecting to see the files, or are you gearing up for a bigger battle?
Well, Stanley Woodward, the number 3 Justice Department official, just entered a notice of appearance in our case. So we expect that they are really freaked out right now, because it's more than just the redactions. You know, there are the specific emails where you're talking about, as you said, torture videos, potentially sex with minor women, where the names of the senders and recipients have been redacted.
Buckle up, friends. John here. This episode is stacked. Behind closed doors, judges and officials are reviewing unredacted files documents with real names and details that the public will never see. While the media focuses on surface-level distractions, the real, dangerous work of accountability is happening in secret. These are the files that mention Donald Trump, alongside a whole constellation of other powerful figures whose names you would recognize instantly. And here's what should make your blood run cold. Some of the people who have seen these files are starting to talk. They're not giving away classified information. They're not breaking their oaths of secrecy, but they're dropping hints. They're making statements that suggest what's in those documents is far worse than anyone has publicly acknowledged. And the implications for Trump specifically are genuinely terrifying if you connect the dots the way the legal system is starting to connect them.
But there's also the fact that there are documents related to Donald Trump that were never produced in the first place. There are issues with the fact that this is a case, an investigation that spanned multiple countries internationally. The Department of Justice categorically did not review documents that weren't in the English language. They just said that they didn't do it. And then on top of that, the redactions that they did make, they didn't explain, which they were required to do by law. So, you know, Judge Sullivan issued a preliminary injunction granting everything that we and Katie Phang requested and rejecting every single argument that the Department of Justice made here.
Why does Katie Phang want to see the unredacted versions of these particular files? Not faulting her at all. Yeah. Good for her. Great journalism. Good for her for subpoenaing it. But there's like 3 million files still missing. Also, like there's so many things. What is it about these files?
These are, you know, as you said, there are millions of documents at issue here. When you're going for a preliminary injunction, it's really important to focus on the things where it is just obvious. It's indisputable that the government is violating the law here. And the important thing is, in their defense,
a federal judge in New York just publicly dressed down the Justice Department for what he called serious redaction errors. Think about that phrasing. Serious, redaction, errors, not minor mistakes, not technical glitches, serious errors in how the government was handling documents related to one of the most infamous criminal networks in modern history. The Justice Department had one job with these Epstein files. They had to protect victims while simultaneously releasing the truth to the public. And they managed to fail at both objectives simultaneously. The redactions were so botched that victim names and identifying images were accidentally exposed to the public. The very people the government was supposed to be protecting were put at risk because of government incompetence. Judge Richard Berman was not amused.
The government didn't even try to argue that it was following the law. They just argued on standing here. And so, you know, these are cases where it's so clear that there is potential wrongdoing here, that these are not the names of victims or minors. These are the names of potential co-conspirators, potential perpetrators that need to get
right. But as you note, in their previous release of about half of the documents that they are under law supposed to have released by a long time ago, they redacted the names of possible perpetrators and did not redact the names of victims and survivors. Again, contrary to the law. Are you worried at all about that happening with these files?
Only if the Department of Justice is actively malicious and tries to punish victims here by releasing names. You know, it is obvious here that the names that are at issue are the names of perpetrators or people in Jeffrey Epstein's orbits, not victims. And if in the incredibly unusual case that they are victims, Judge Sullivan has given them a chance to say as much and explain why they can't produce that. So they have the chance to do that.
A billionaire investor with ties to Jeffrey Epstein is being deposed amid the ongoing House Oversight Committee investigation.
He made the government fix their mistakes. He canceled a planned hearing because finally, after the court intervened, the Justice Department actually did what it was supposed to do in the first place. But that's not the end of the story. It's barely the beginning. Two members of Congress, representing different parties and different political philosophies, went on national television and said something that should have made every American sit up straighter in their chair. They had reviewed the full unredacted Epstein files in a secure congressional setting. They had seen the documents without the black bars, without the careful editing, without the government spin, and what they found disturbed them enough that they felt compelled to speak publicly. Both of them said the same thing. At least a half dozen powerful men are being shielded by over-redactions. At least 6 people whose names and connections the public is not seeing.
Into the dead pedophile and his evil web, Leon Black, the former head of private equity firm Apollo Global Management, sat today for a closed-door interview on Capitol Hill about his relationship with Epstein. Lawmakers say Black declined to answer questions about non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, and that's when the chairman of the committee, James Comer, made this move.
I have just issued 2 subpoenas to Mr. Black. The NDAs are between him and other women. We want to know, was Jeffrey Epstein involved in the NDAs? Was he involved in writing? Was he involved in awarding funds to the women for the NDAs? What was the reason for the NDAs? We want to know everything about the NDAs.
It's hard to overstate just how significant it is that a Republican chairman of this committee made that announcement to issue 2 subpoenas. That is a big deal. Leon Black apparently expressed regret about his dealings with the late sex offender in a letter to investors in 2020.
Not a rumor, not speculation, the conclusion of 2 lawmakers who actually saw the real documents. Let that sink in for a moment. The government released millions of pages of documents to the public. They went through the motions of transparency. But the people who actually reviewed the unredacted versions are telling us that what we're getting is not the full story. Not even close. There are names being hidden. There are connections being obscured. There are powerful figures who are being protected by a system that is supposed to be about accountability. And the fact that a Republican from Kentucky and a Democrat from California agree on this should tell you everything you need to know about whether this is a partisan issue. It's not. It's a transparency issue. It's a justice issue.
After a New York Times report alleged, quote, the 2 men often socialized and dined together, and Mr. Black was a lucrative client for Mr. Epstein over the final decade of his life, unquote. Black then stepped away from Apollo in 2021. An internal investigation by the company found no wrongdoing. That probe ultimately concluded Black's payments to Epstein totaled $158 million between 2012 and 2017. Black is one of the rare witnesses that the House panel has talked to who have faced allegations of abusing women in connection with Epstein. One woman told the FBI that Black became sexual in a massage Epstein had directed her to give him. A separate woman alleged that Black had raped her in 2014 and described going to Epstein's Florida house with Black, where she says she was told she would have sex with Epstein. An attorney for Leon Black tells CNN he has never, quote, abused, assaulted, or raped, unquote, any girl or woman, and calls the allegations, quote, completely false. Black has categorically denied any wrongdoing and knowledge of Epstein's crimes. In his opening statement to the Oversight Committee, he said, quote, I have never abused a woman. I have never been with an underage woman. I have never engaged in sex trafficking. I have never paid Epstein for access to women. I was never blackmailed by Epstein.
It's a fundamental question about whether the legal system actually applies equally to everyone or whether it bends to protect the powerful. The Justice Department just published approximately 3.5 million pages from the Epstein files. 3.5 million. That's not a typo. That's 3.5 million documents containing who knows what information about who knows what people. And buried somewhere in that mountain of paperwork is a press release from DOJ that contains a line that should make everyone's ears perk up. The release explicitly warns that some of these documents contain, quote, untrue and sensationalist claims about President Trump that were submitted to the FBI right before the 2020 election. So let's unpack what that actually means. The government is sitting on millions of pages of documents. Some of those documents accuse Trump of things. The government admits the accusations exist. But they also say some of them are fake, only they won't tell us which parts are fake and which parts are real. They just dump everything out there with a vague disclaimer and call it transparency. This is the game they're playing. Judges get to see everything. Investigators get to see everything. Members of Congress in secure rooms get to see everything. But you and me, we get redacted versions with half the names blacked out and a warning that some of it might be lies. And we're just supposed to trust that the people with access to the real files are making the right calls about what we're allowed to know. This matters more than most people realize, because in our legal system, what a judge sees matters more than what the public sees. The public might never get to see the unredacted Epstein files. The black bars might stay in place forever, but judges have already seen them. Investigators have already reviewed them. And the evidence contained in those documents can still be used to build criminal cases, civil cases, or investigations, even if the public never knows the details. So when people ask whether Trump is actually in danger from these files, the honest answer is that we don't know. We can't know, because we don't know what judges are seeing behind those closed doors. What we do know is that some very powerful people are extremely nervous right now. The fact that a federal judge just forced the Justice Department to fix its redaction screw-ups tells you something. The fact that members of Congress are publicly hinting that powerful men are being protected tells you something. The fact that the government itself is admitting that accusations against Trump exist in these files tells you something. And when you put all of those pieces together, you start to see a picture that should worry anyone who cares about accountability and justice. The redaction system is supposed to serve legitimate purposes. Protecting victim identities is important. Protecting classified intelligence sources is important. Protecting ongoing investigations is important. But the system also creates a convenient shield for the powerful. When government officials decide what the public gets to see and what gets hidden, they have enormous power to shape the narrative. They can protect allies, embarrass enemies, and control the flow of information in ways that serve their interests rather than the public interest. And the Epstein files situation is a perfect example of how that power can be abused. Congressman Thomas Massie and Congressman Ro Khanna went on CNN and said that at least a half dozen powerful men are being shielded. They didn't name names, they can't, the files are classified. But they made it crystal clear that what the public is getting is not the full picture. And the fact that these two men who disagree on almost everything politically are standing together on this tells you that what they saw was serious enough to overcome their partisan differences. This is not about politics. This is about powerful people hiding from accountability behind the government's redaction process. The timeline of events here is critical to understanding why this matters so much. The federal judge publicly called out the Justice Department for its redaction errors. The government had to go back and fix its mistakes. Victim names and images had been accidentally exposed because the DOJ couldn't even handle the basic task of protecting the people it was supposed to protect. And while all of this was happening, two members of Congress were reviewing the unredacted files and reaching conclusions that should make everyone uncomfortable. At least 6 powerful men are being protected by over-redactions. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's the conclusion of elected officials who actually saw what's in those files. The Justice Department's press release about the 3.5 million pages is also revealing in what it doesn't say. It acknowledges that accusations against Trump exist in the documents. It says some of them are untrue and sensationalist. But it doesn't say which ones, it doesn't say how many, it doesn't provide any context for distinguishing between credible accusations and false ones. The government just throws out a blanket disclaimer and lets the public figure it out. And that's exactly how they want it. Confusion serves their purposes. If nobody can figure out what's true and what's not, then nobody can hold anyone accountable. Trump's legal exposure from all of this is genuinely concerning for anyone who cares about the rule of law. Even if the public never sees the unredacted files, judges have already seen them. Investigators have already reviewed them. And if there's real evidence of wrongdoing in those documents, it can still be used in court. It can still lead to charges. It can still result in consequences. The public might never know the details, but the legal system can still act on what it finds. That's how these things work. The behind-the-scenes work often matters more than the public spectacle. The fact that the government felt compelled to include a disclaimer about Trump in its press release is also telling. They could have just released the documents without mentioning Trump at all. They could have let the public discover whatever was in there on their own. But instead, they proactively addressed the Trump accusations. They wanted to get ahead of the story. They wanted to cast doubt on the accusations before anyone could even read them. That's a defensive move. That's the kind of thing you do when you're worried about what's in those documents and how it might be used. The court system's involvement in all of this is also significant. Judge Berman didn't have to make a public statement about the redaction errors. He could have quietly ordered the government to fix the problems and moved on. But he chose to make his concerns public. He chose to let everyone know that the Justice Department had screwed up and that the court had to step in. That kind of public rebuke is rare. Judges usually prefer to handle things behind the scenes. When a judge goes out of his way to publicly criticize the government, it means something. It means the problems were serious enough that they couldn't be ignored or quietly resolved. The implications of all of this extend far beyond Trump himself. The Epstein files are about a network of wealthy, powerful, connected individuals who were part of Epstein's world in one way or another. Some of them were victims. Some of them were witnesses. Some of them may have been complicit in his crimes. And the redaction process is determining which of those names the public gets to see and which ones get hidden. The question everyone should be asking is who decides? Who decides which names stay hidden and which names get exposed? Who decides what the public deserves to know and what we can't handle? Who decides that some powerful people deserve protection while others don't? The answer, unfortunately, is that these decisions are being made by people with their own agendas, their own biases, their own interests. The Justice Department is not some neutral arbiter of truth. It's a political institution staffed by political appointees who answer to political masters. And when you have a system where the government decides what information the public can see, you have a system that can be manipulated to serve political purposes. The Epstein files situation is a perfect example of how that manipulation works in practice. The two members of Congress who spoke publicly about what they saw in the unredacted files are taking a significant risk by doing so. They're operating at the edge of what's allowed. They can't reveal classified information without facing serious consequences. But they can hint. They can suggest. They can tell the public that there's more to the story than what the government is releasing. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're using their positions to signal to the public that something is wrong with how this process is working. The public's frustration with all of this is entirely justified. We live in a country that supposedly values transparency. We have laws that are supposed to ensure that government documents are available to the public. We have a free press that's supposed to hold powerful people accountable. But in reality, there's a two-tiered system. There's what judges and investigators and members of Congress get to see, and then there's what the rest of us get to see. And the gap between those two things is where accountability goes to die. Every time the government hides something, every time they over-redact, every time they release millions of pages with vague disclaimers, they're feeding the conspiracy theories they claim to be fighting. When people can't see the full truth, they fill in the blanks with speculation. And when the subject is Jeffrey Epstein, powerful men, and accusations against a sitting president, the speculation is going to run wild. The government could shut a lot of that down by just being transparent, but they won't, because transparency would mean accountability, and accountability would mean powerful people facing consequences. The legal system is quietly reviewing material that the public will never fully see. That's not speculation. That's a documented fact. Judges have seen the unredacted files. Investigators have reviewed them. And somewhere in those millions of pages, there are names and connections that could change everything. The fact that we don't know which names or which connections is precisely the point. The secrecy is the story. The redactions are the story. The gap between what the powerful know and what the public knows is the story. The prison alert angle isn't about predicting the future. It's about recognizing the present. Right now, at this exact moment, the machinery of justice is turning. Judges are reviewing evidence. Investigators are following leads. The legal system is doing its work behind the scenes, while the public is distracted by whatever drama is playing out on social media. And when that work is done, when the investigations conclude, when the decisions are made, the results could be devastating for anyone whose name appears in those files. That's the reality that everyone needs to understand. The Epstein files are not going away. The pressure from victims, from lawmakers, from the public, it's not going away. And as long as there's a gap between what judges see and what we see, there's going to be questions about who's being protected and why. Trump's name is in those files. His accusers' claims are in those files. And whether those claims are true or false, the fact that they exist and that they're being reviewed by people with the power to act on them means this story is far from over. The next time you hear about redaction failures, about lawmakers demanding transparency, about judges forcing the government to release more information, remember that behind all of that, there are real files with real names and real accusations. And some of those names belong to the most powerful people in the world. And some of those accusations, if they turn out to be true, could change everything. That's the story. That's why it matters. And that's why everyone should be paying attention to what's happening behind those closed doors, because what's happening there could ultimately determine the fate of some of the most powerful people on earth, including the man currently sitting in the White House. The legal exposure that Trump faces from all of this is real, and it is significant. Even if the public never sees the unredacted files, judges have already seen them. Investigators have already reviewed them. And if there's real evidence of wrongdoing in those documents, it can still be used in court, can still lead to charges, can still result in consequences. That's the prison alert part of this story. Not that Trump is going to prison tomorrow, but that the process is moving forward and he is in the crosshairs. The government's own statements confirm that accusations exist in these files. The fact that members of Congress are publicly saying powerful men are being protected confirms that there's more to the story than we're being told. The judge's rebuke of the Justice Department confirms that the government can't even handle basic document releases competently. All of this adds up to a situation that should concern anyone who cares about justice. Because when the system fails to be transparent, when powerful people get protected, when judges have to force the government to do its job, the public loses trust. And once that trust is lost, it's almost impossible to get it back. So here we are. Millions of pages of documents, redactions that went wrong, lawmakers who are worried, judges who are angry, and a president whose name appears in those documents in ways that could potentially be damaging. The pieces are all in place for a major legal and political confrontation. The question isn't whether something will happen. The question is when and what form it will take. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes this story so important to follow. The Epstein files are a ticking time bomb. They contain information about powerful people that the government is trying to control. The redaction process is the mechanism of that control. And every time the government screws up the redactions, every time a lawmaker hints that powerful people are being protected, every time a judge forces the government to do its job, the clock gets a little closer to midnight. At some point, something is going to give. Someone is going to reveal what's actually in those files. Someone is going to hold accountable the people who have been protected. And when that happens, it's going to shake the foundations of American politics. The real story of accountability is unfolding behind the scenes, away from media headlines. Judges and lawmakers are moving, and the truth will emerge at the worst possible moment for those who thought they could hide. The danger is real, and the system can't protect the powerful forever.